Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we are unpacking a story that is honestly just absolutely wild. We're going to trace how one single, seemingly pretty simple idea compounded into what is essentially the invisible infrastructure of modern capitalism. We're talking about the architect of the everything store himself, Jeff Bezos, and the totally unprecedented rise of Amazon. So strap in, because the sheer scale of what we're about to look at is absolutely staggering.
$1.2 million. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the amount of money this company currently generates every single minute of the day. Not every month, not every week, literally every 60 seconds. And the craziest part? They didn't do it with some flashy viral marketing scheme. They did it through a highly methodical, totally relentless strategy that systematically reshaped entire industries over the last 30 years. To really wrap our heads around the scale of a $2 trillion global empire, we kind of have to look at where it all started. And it started in the passenger seat of a beat-up Chevy Blazer. The architect behind all this was a kid born in 1964, a kid who literally gave a high school graduation speech about building space hotels. He eventually goes on to become a Princeton valedictorian with a double major in electrical engineering and computer science before landing a super lucrative gig as a senior VP at a pretty mysterious Wall Street hedge fund called D.E. Shaw.
Which brings us to our first major chapter, the 2,300% epiphany. This is the inciting incident that pulled him right off Wall Street.
So while he was working at D.E. Shaw, Bezos came across this reality-bending statistic. He saw that the internet was growing at 2,300% per year. 2,300%. He realized instantly that this wasn't just a fad, it was a total gravitational force. So he sits down and actually makes a spreadsheet of 20 different internet business ideas. We're talking everything from selling online CDs to dog food. But ultimately, he chooses books. Why books? Well, they were easy to store, they were already perfectly standardized, and they basically served as the ultimate e-commerce gateway drug to get consumers comfortable with buying things online.
Now, as you can imagine, pivoting your entire life is not easy. Bezos walks into his boss's office to pitch this grand idea of leaving to, sell books on the internet. And his boss at D.E. Shaw famously looks at him and says, "That sounds like a great idea for someone who doesn't already have a good job." It's pretty hilarious in hindsight, right? But it really highlights the immense personal risk that Bezos and his fiancée Mackenzie were taking by just walking away from these incredibly comfortable, prestigious lives.
But undeterred, he took action. Step 1, he quits the Wall Street job. Step 2, he and Mackenzie pack up their entire lives and drive that Chevy Blazer cross-country from New York all the way to Seattle. And step 3, this is my favorite part, while Mackenzie drove, Jeff literally typed up the business plan on his laptop at 65 miles per hour somewhere along Interstate 80. Fun fact here, he actually almost named the company Cadabra, like abracadabra, but his lawyer pointed out it sounded way too much like cadaver, which is not great for branding. He also toyed with the name Relentless, but finally settled on Amazon because it would show up super early in alphabetized web directories, and of course, it represented the biggest, most massive river in the world.
All right, let's move into our next section, building the everything store, looking at those wild, chaotic early days in the summer of 1994.
So in the early days, frugality wasn't just a guideline, it was an absolute obsession. They launched with a mere $10,000 in seed money, which, by the way, actually came straight from his parents' retirement fund. Talk about pressure. And instead of buying fancy office furniture, Bezos, he just built the desks himself out of plain wooden doors bolted to 2x4s. In July 1995, the site officially goes live, and they sell their very first item. It was this dense, super niche textbook about artificial intelligence. And back then, they had this bell in the office, and they would literally ring it every single time an order came in. They did that until they were growing so fast, it basically became a continuous ringing noise, and they had to rip the bell out entirely.
This intense frugality quickly evolved into a pretty ruthless corporate philosophy. In 1997, Amazon goes public. Now, at the time, they were not profitable at all, and critics in the media literally dubbed the company Amazon Toast. They thought it was done for. But Bezos? He wasn't playing the short game. His whole mantra was get big fast. He explicitly told his investors to completely ignore short-term profit and focus purely on long-term growth. A really prime example of this was his incredibly controversial decision to allow transparent customer reviews on the site. Other retailers thought it was absolute insanity to let random people trash-talk products on your own store. But Bezos knew that transparency would build deep, unbreakable trust. And that trust? That would engineer unparalleled long-term customer loyalty.
But, as we know, the good times didn't last forever. We now enter
The dot-com crucible, where all that wild, unchecked optimism of the 90s just abruptly curdled into pure fear. So March 2000 hits, and the dot-com bubble completely bursts. Amazon stock, which had been flying high at over $100 a share, just violently crashes down to a measly $6. Wall Street analysts were actively predicting their total bankruptcy, calling them Amazon.bomb. It was a literal near-death experience for the entire company. But instead of panicking and throwing in the towel, Bezos went incredibly cold and surgical. He slashed the company's burn rate, cut entire teams, and completely streamlined their operations. Those famous door desks definitely stayed, but the luxury of just endlessly experimenting, that was completely gone.
But surviving that crash, it forged Amazon into something virtually unbreakable. By 2002, the new company mantra was to build fast, scale even harder, and basically never get caught off guard again. This led to a rapid-fire series of paradigm shifts, what we can really just call the kill shots. In 2005, they launched Amazon Prime. Now, competitors thought offering unlimited 2-day free shipping was straight-up financial suicide. But it was actually this brilliant psychological loyalty trap that totally conditioned customers to just buy more, faster. Then in 2006, they launched AWS. And in 2007, they released the Kindle, a device that quietly and efficiently replaced physical paper with pixels practically overnight, completely collapsing traditional publishing models.
Which perfectly segues into our next major chapter, the invisible infrastructure. This is the exact moment where Amazon transitions from simply selling things to becoming a massive underlying machine. I want you to imagine for a second that your tech team is just absolutely drowning in explosive growth. In the mid-2000s, that was Amazon's stark reality. Their internal systems simply could not handle the sheer, crushing volume of their own rapid expansion. They had a massive internal crisis on their hands. And the world-changing solution that came out of that crisis was Amazon Web Services, or AWS. Basically, to save themselves, they had to build this incredibly flexible, modular, elastic computing power that could scale up or down instantly based on traffic. This accidental internal fix turned out to be so ridiculously good, they decided to package it up and turn it into a public product. AWS became one of their most powerful weapons, literally turning the very competitors who were fighting Amazon's retail dominance into paying tenants on Amazon's own servers. To put that into perspective, today, this invisible infrastructure likely powers the very apps you're using on your phone right now, alongside giants like Netflix, NASA, and even the CIA. Building this invisible infrastructure allowed for a staggering ecosystem takeover across retail, entertainment, and tech. They went on an absolute tear, strategically acquiring companies like Zappos, Audible, and Twitch, and dropping a casual $13.7 billion on Whole Foods just to completely reimagine physical grocery logistics. However, it's important to note this massive scale brought extremely heavy scrutiny. Independent sellers on Amazon's marketplace began reporting a pretty disturbing trend. They alleged that Amazon was using their internal seller data to clone successful products and then offer Amazon-branded competition at significantly lower prices. While Amazon cited this as just a coincidence rather than a corporate strategy, to outsiders it raised some really serious questions about a platform seemingly devouring its own ecosystem. And internally, this machine was driven by just ruthless efficiency. Bezos famously operated under a chilling warning to entire industries: your margin is my opportunity. Inside the walls of Amazon, PowerPoint presentations were outright banned in favor of these incredibly structured, logic-driven 6-page written memos. Emotion absolutely did not drive decisions. Cold, hard data did. But that intense optimization extended straight down to the warehouse floors too, where multiple reports of grueling conditions and nearly impossible quotas surfaced. In fact, some warehouse workers reportedly went as far as referring to their digital tracking scanners as the wristbands of Sauron. Which brings us to the climax of this explainer, targeting the final frontier. Let's look at the ultimate empire builder's next move. By 2020, amidst all this mounting pressure and serious accusations of crushing small sellers and weaponizing market data, Bezos was actually summoned to testify before Congress to defend his $2 trillion empire. And he defended his practices with the exact same methodical precision he used to build them in the first place. But then, almost anticlimactically in February 2021, he drops a bombshell. He announces he is stepping down as CEO, quietly handing the reins over to the head of AWS, Andy Jassy. It was like the architect had finally finished building his giant machine and just casually exited day-to-day operations.
So what exactly do you do when you step down from running the everything store? Well, you pivot right back to your original childhood obsession. Bezos went through this incredibly striking physical transformation, suddenly becoming this jacked billionaire navigating a highly publicized $36 billion divorce and buying a $500 million superyacht. But his real, true focus shifted entirely to Blue Origin, his private rocket company. While other billionaires were out there chasing space tourism stunts, Bezos started quietly funding heavy-duty, reusable launch systems, actual lunar landers, and these massive orbital habitats.
And then, Bezos eventually revealed the ultimate twist to this whole story. He stated that his true vision is to, quote, move all heavy industry off-planet to keep Earth pristine. Let that sink in. Amazon, the most dominant retail and tech engine in modern history, was never his actual endgame. It was simply his incredibly lucrative launchpad to fund his true high school-era ambition, colonizing the solar system.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative question to ponder today. If Amazon, the everything store that totally reshaped our entire global economy, was really just a means to an end, what on earth does humanity's next chapter look like under the ultimate empire builder? It's a pretty fascinating, maybe slightly terrifying thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep your eyes on the stars.